The moon of Zixer 7 hung in the void like a forgotten jewel, its surface shimmering with hues of deep violet and silver. It was not a place known for beauty or wonder, but rather for its harshness and unforgiving expanse of jagged mountains, toxic mists, and sprawling alien cities that glowed faintly under perpetual twilight. To the dominant species of this world, the Vrina race of towering insectoid creatures with gleaming black carapaces, Zixer 7 was home, a domain where power and survival reigned supreme. In one corner of their sprawling capital city, however, there existed something unusual even by Vrin standards. Hidden beneath layers of shadow in an underground arena, chained to a rusted metal post, sat a figure unlike anything most had ever seen. Her name, if she still remembered it, was long lost to time. She was human, though few who passed through the dim corridors above knew what human truly meant. To the Vrin, she was nothing more than property, a curiosity captured during some distant raid on a primitive planet they deemed unworthy of further attention. Her wrists were bound by thick iron cuffs, connected to chains bolted into the ground. Her clothes, once vibrant, now tattered rags, hung loosely around her thin frame. Dirt smeared her skin, and her hair, once neatly braided, was now wild and tangled. Despite the filth and exhaustion etched into every line of her body, there was something about her eyes that refused to fade, a flicker of defiance, a spark of life that no amount of cruelty could extinguish. The Vrin treated her as little more than an animal, feeding her scraps from chipped bowls and leaving her exposed to the biting cold of the underground chambers. They poked at her with sharp sticks when they grew bored, laughing among themselves in clicks and hums only they could understand. Some came simply to gawk, marveling at how weak and fragile she appeared compared to their own armored forms. Others whispered amongst themselves, speculating whether humans were even sentient beings at all, but there was one ritual that drew crowds larger than any other. A brutal spectacle held once every cycle. The Vrin would drag her out into the center of the arena, forcing her to crawl across jagged rocks while spectators jeered from above. Sometimes they unleashed small predatory creatures native to Zixer 7, watching with morbid fascination as she scrambled to evade their snapping jaws. Each time she survived, not because they wanted her to live, but because death would mean losing their entertainment. No one questioned why she endured. No one cared enough to ask. To the Vrin, she was less than livestock, a plaything whose screams echoed through the cavernous halls like music. And yet, despite everything, she clung to life, drawing strength from some unseen well within herself. Perhaps it was hope. Perhaps it was sheer willpower. Or perhaps it was simply the stubborn refusal to let them win. One fateful evening, as the arena lights buzzed dimly overhead, a new presence entered the scene. A lone trader, clad in a sleek silver suit lined with glowing blue circuitry, stepped forward from the crowd. His face was obscured behind a reflective visor, but his posture radiated authority. He moved with purpose, ignoring the jeers of the Vrin around him as he approached the edge of the pit where the woman lay huddled against the chill. For reasons unknown, he lingered longer than most observers dared. Through the glare of his visor, he watched her intently, studying the way her chest rose and fell with labored breaths, noting the tension in her shoulders as she flinched at the sound of approaching footsteps. Something about her caught his interest, something deeper than pity or curiosity. When the guards finally ushered him away, he left without a word, but the look in his eyes suggested he had already made a decision. That night, whispers began to spread throughout the city. Rumors swirled of a wealthy off-worlder willing to pay handsomely for exotic slaves. By morning, the Vrin elders gathered in secret chambers to discuss the matter. Little did they know, their choice to sell the mysterious human woman would set into motion events far beyond their comprehension and change the fate of Zixer 7 forever. As dawn broke over the horizon, casting eerie shadows across the jagged landscape, the woman lifted her head slightly, her gaze fixed on the distant glow of the sky. For the first time in years, a strange sensation stirred within her chest, not fear, not despair, but something else entirely. Hope? Anticipation? Whatever it was, it felt foreign, unfamiliar, and dangerous, Little did she know, help was closer than she realized. But freedom, as she would soon discover, often came at a price. The trader returned 2 cycles later, his arrival announced by the hum of a sleek hovercraft descending into the heart of the Vryn capital. The vehicle gleamed under the dim light of Zixer 7's artificial suns, its polished surface reflecting the jagged spires of the city like a mirror. To the Vryn, it was an object of envy, a symbol of wealth and power far beyond their reach. But to the human woman chained in the underground arena, it meant nothing at all. She had no way of knowing that this machine carried the man who would alter her fate. His name was Captain Elias Venn, though few outside his crew knew much about him. A seasoned explorer and merchant from Earth's outer colonies, Elias had spent decades navigating the stars, trading goods, knowledge, and occasionally favors across countless alien civilizations. He wasn't particularly heroic by nature. He was pragmatic, driven more by profit than altruism. Yet there was something about him, perhaps the quiet intensity in his gaze or the calm authority in his voice, that inspired trust among those who met him. Elias stepped out of the hovercraft with deliberate slowness, his boots clicking against the metallic ground. His suit shimmered faintly as its embedded circuits adjusted to the temperature of the moon's atmosphere. Behind him trailed 2 members of his crew, both armed but unobtrusive, their weapons holstered yet ready if needed. The Vryn elders greeted him with cautious respect, their antennae twitching nervously as they bowed low. They were eager to impress, desperate to secure the riches Elias promised in exchange for exotic wares. It didn't take long for negotiations to begin. In a grand chamber adorned with glowing crystals and pulsating bioluminescent fungi, the Vryn presented their prized possessions, rare minerals, ancient artifacts, and finally, living captives. Among them was the human woman, dragged forward by guards whose claws clinked ominously against her chains. Her head remained bowed, her body trembling slightly as though bracing for another round of cruelty. She dared not look up, let alone meet the stranger's eyes, but Elias did not react the way the Vryn expected. Instead of inspecting her like livestock, he crouched down until he was eye level with her. Slowly, deliberately, he removed his visor, revealing weathered features softened by years of experience. His dark eyes locked onto hers, searching for something beneath the layers of dirt and despair. For a moment, the room seemed to fall silent, the buzzing clicks of the Vryn fading into the background. "She's injured," Elias said finally, his voice calm but firm. "It wasn't a question," one of the elders clicked irritably. "She is resilient. She will heal." Elias tilted his head slightly, studying the elder without rising. "Resilient or stubborn?" He paused, then added, almost to himself, "There's strength here, strength you don't understand." The comment drew murmurs from the gathered Vryn, some intrigued, others offended. Humans were supposed to be weak, after all, fragile creatures, easily dominated by superior beings. That belief was so deeply ingrained in their culture that the mere suggestion otherwise felt like blasphemy. Ignoring their reactions, Elias turned back to the woman. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small device, a nutrient injector commonly used by spacefarers to treat malnutrition. With gentle movements, he pressed it against her arm, ignoring her flinch as the serum entered her bloodstream. Then, standing, he addressed the elders once more. "I'll take her," he said simply, "and I'll pay double your asking price." The announcement sent shockwaves through the chamber. Double? For a broken slave? The offer was unprecedented, almost insulting in its generosity. Yet none of the Vryn dared argue. Money spoke louder than pride, especially when it came wrapped in technology they could barely comprehend. As the deal was finalized, the woman found herself loaded onto the hovercraft alongside crates of other purchased goods. Shackles still bound her wrists, but she noticed something different now, a subtle shift in the air around her. The trader, who introduced himself simply as Captain Venn, didn't speak much during the journey, but his presence alone was enough to make her wonder if this change might actually mean something. Hours passed before they landed on the outskirts of the city, where Elias' ship waited, a massive vessel shaped like a crescent moon, its hull etched with glowing runes that pulsed softly in the twilight. As the crew prepared to board, Elias approached her one last time. Kneeling again, he reached for the chains binding her wrists. "This won't hurt," he said quietly, pulling out a small tool. With a soft whir, the lock snapped open, freeing her hands for the first time in years. She stared at them, flexing her fingers tentatively, as though unsure whether the sensation was real. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. Elias hesitated, then offered a faint smile. "Because sometimes humanity needs reminding of what it means to be human." Before she could respond, alarms blared in the distance. The Vryn, realizing too late what they had sold, had sent enforcers to reclaim their property. Dozens of armored figures swarmed toward the ship, their weapons raised and clicking menacingly. Elias stood quickly, extending a hand to her. "We need to move, now." For a moment, she hesitated, torn between fear and instinct. Then, surprising even herself, she took his hand. Together they ran toward the ship, pursued by shouts and laser fire. Behind them, chaos erupted as the Vryn tried to stop them, but Elias' crew was ready. Defensive turrets roared to life, sending bursts of energy rippling through the air. As the ramp closed behind them, and the engines roared to life, the woman collapsed onto the floor of the cargo bay, her heart pounding wildly. She didn't know where she was going or what awaited her next, but for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't dared to feel before: hope. And somewhere deep inside, she wondered if perhaps humans weren't as powerless as everyone, including herself, had believed. The ship, named Eos Dawn, hummed with life as it ascended through Zixer-7's toxic atmosphere. Its sleek interior was a stark contrast to the cold, jagged world below. Soft blue lights illuminated the corridors, and the faint scent of recycled air mixed with the metallic tang of advanced machinery filled every corner. For the first time in years, the woman felt warmth not just from the cabin's climate control, but from something deeper within herself. She sat huddled on a cot in the medical bay, wrapped in a thick blanket that smelled faintly of disinfectant. Her wrists, raw and bruised from the chains, had been cleaned and bandaged by one of Elias' crew members, a quiet medic named Jara. Jara didn't speak much, but her actions spoke volumes. Every movement was deliberate, every touch gentle yet efficient. When she finished tending to the woman's wounds, she placed a small tray of food beside her, a simple meal of nutrient paste and rehydrated fruit. It wasn't luxurious, but to the woman it tasted like freedom. "You should eat," Jara said softly before leaving the room. "You're safe here." Safe. The word echoed in her mind like a foreign language. Safe? Was such a thing even possible anymore? She glanced around the sterile confines of the medical bay, her eyes lingering on the locked door. Could she trust these people? Or was this just another cage, albeit a prettier one? Her thoughts were interrupted when Elias entered the room. He carried himself with an air of authority, but his expression softened as he approached her, setting down a data pad. On the edge of the cot, he pulled up a chair and sat across from her. "I imagine you have questions," he began, his voice calm and measured. "I'll answer what I can." She hesitated, unsure where to start. Finally, she whispered, "Why did you buy me?" Elias leaned back slightly, considering his words carefully. "Let's just say I've seen enough cruelty in this galaxy, too. Know when someone deserves better than they're getting." He paused, then added, "Besides, humans are rare out here. Most species think we're extinct or too primitive to matter. I figured saving one might remind them otherwise." His answer surprised her. Not because of its content, she'd long since stopped believing anyone cared about her fate, but because of the conviction behind it. There was no mockery in his tone, no condescension. "Just honesty. What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "That depends on you," Elias replied. "This ship is headed to a human colony near the outer rim. You can stay there if you want. Start over. But if you'd rather come with us?" He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. "Come with you?" she repeated, frowning. "To do what?" "To help us fight back," he said simply. "The Vryn aren't going to let you go without a fight. They'll see your escape as a challenge and insult to their pride. If we don't prepare, they'll hunt us down." For a moment she said nothing, her gaze dropping to the floor. Fight back? Against the Vryn? The idea seemed absurd. What could she possibly contribute? She was weak, broken, and terrified of almost everything. How could she stand against creatures who viewed her as less than dirt? But then she remembered the look in Elias' eyes when he freed her, the determination, the quiet strength. And she thought about the way his crew moved with purpose, working together like a well-oiled machine. Maybe she couldn't fight alone. But maybe she didn't have to. Over the next few days, the woman whom the crew began calling Lyra, after a constellation visible from Earth started to find her footing aboard the Eos Dawn. At first, she kept to herself, observing the others from a distance. The crew was diverse, made up of humans and aliens alike, each bringing their own skills to the table. There was Kale, a burly engineer with a penchant for storytelling. Nira, a sharp-tongued navigator whose quick wit masked a fierce loyalty. And Tarek, a soft-spoken linguist fluent in dozens of languages, including the Vryn's complex clicks and hums. Lyra watched them work, marveling at how seamlessly they operated as a team. Slowly, tentatively, she began to join in. She started by helping Jara in the medbay, organizing supplies and learning basic care techniques. Then, encouraged by Kale, she ventured into the engine room, where he taught her how to identify faulty components and repair minor damage. Each task was small, but each success brought a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in years. One evening, while the ship drifted through the void, Elias called a meeting in the main lounge. The crew gathered around a holographic display, projecting a map of nearby star systems. Lyra lingered near the doorway, unsure whether she belonged, but Elias gestured for her to join them. "We intercepted a transmission earlier today," he began, his tone grave. "The Vryn are mobilizing. A fleet of warships is heading our way." A murmur rippled through the group. Even Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. She'd known the Vryn wouldn't give up easily, but hearing it confirmed made the threat feel real and immediate. "They'll be here in 3 days," Elias continued. "We can outrun them temporarily, but eventually we'll need to face them, which brings me to my plan." He tapped the display, highlighting a cluster of asteroids orbiting a nearby gas giant. "We'll lure them into the asteroid field. Their ships are larger and less maneuverable than ours. If we play our cards, right, we can use the terrain to our advantage." "But what about weapons?" Nira asked. "Their firepower dwarfs ours." "We're outgunned." "That's where humanity comes in," Elias said, turning to Lyra. "You've seen how the Vryn treat us as weak, insignificant pests. That's their weakness. They underestimate us. And we're going to make sure they regret it." Lyra blinked, startled. "Me? What can I do?" "You've lived among them," Elias explained. "You know their routines, their arrogance. That knowledge is invaluable. Plus," he smiled faintly, "you've got survival instincts most people lose after a week in captivity. Trust me, that's worth more than any weapon." As the meeting concluded, Lyra found herself unable to sleep. Her mind raced with possibilities and fears. Could she really help bring down the beings who had tormented her for so long? Or would she freeze under pressure, proving their assumptions about humanity correct? The next morning, she sought out Tarek in the communications hub. "Teach me," she said abruptly, "everything you know about the Vryn, their language, their culture, their tactics. I want to understand them." Tarek raised an eyebrow but nodded. "All right, but fair warning, it's not easy." "Are you sure you're ready?" Lyra straightened, her resolve hardening. "I have to be." By the time the Vryn fleet appeared on their scanners, Lyra had transformed. No longer the timid, broken figure who'd boarded the ship, she now moved with purpose, her eyes sharp and focused. She stood beside Elias on the bridge as the Eos Dawn plunged into the asteroid field, dodging debris while laying traps for their pursuers. The battle that followed was chaotic, a blur of explosions and narrow escapes. But amidst the chaos, Lyra found clarity. Using her knowledge of the Vryn, she guided the crew through critical decisions, predicting enemy movements and exploiting their overconfidence. When the dust settled and the Vryn retreated, battered and humiliated, The crew erupted into cheers, and in that moment, Lyra realized something profound. Humanity wasn't defined by strength or size. It was defined by resilience, creativity, and the unyielding refusal to give up, even when all odds seemed insurmountable. The aftermath of the asteroid field skirmish left the Eos Dawn battered but victorious. Hull plating was scorched and several systems flickered unpredictably, but the ship and its crew had survived. The Vryn fleet had retreated, their arrogance shattered by the unexpected ferocity of a smaller, seemingly weaker opponent. For the first time in years, Lyra felt something she hadn't dared to feel since her capture. Power not the kind wielded through force or dominance, but the quiet strength that came from unity, strategy, and sheer will. But the victory was short-lived. As the crew worked tirelessly to repair the damage inflicted during the battle, Elias called another meeting in the main lounge. This time, the atmosphere was heavier, tinged with both triumph and uncertainty. The holographic display showed the projected route of the retreating Vryn ships, their trajectory leading them back toward Zixer 7. "They're regrouping," Elias said, his voice low but firm. "And when they do, they'll come at us harder. We hurt their pride, and now they'll stop at nothing to reclaim it." Lyra sat quietly in the corner, her hands clasped tightly together. She'd played a key role in the battle, using her knowledge of the Vryn to anticipate their moves and exploit their weaknesses. Yet, as the adrenaline faded, doubt crept back in. Was she truly ready for what lay ahead? Could she keep up with the crew's relentless determination? "We can't outrun them forever," Nira interjected, her sharp green eyes scanning the room. "Even if we patch up the ship, they'll hunt us down eventually. Sooner or later, we'll have to make a stand. And where exactly do you suggest we do that?" Kale asked, his arms crossed over his broad chest. "Or outnumbered 10-1. Unless you've got some secret weapon stashed away, I don't see how we win this." Nira shot him a glare, but before she could respond, Tarek spoke up. "There might be another way," he said slowly, tapping at the holographic map. "If we head toward the Veil Nebula, we could use its gravitational anomalies to mask our movements. It's risky, the fields are unstable, but it might buy us enough time to prepare." "Prepare for what?" Jara asked softly, her tone laced with concern. "Even with more time, we're still outmatched." All eyes turned to Elias, who had remained silent throughout the debate. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked directly at Lyra. "What about you?" She blinked, caught off guard. "Me? Yes," Elias replied, his gaze steady. "You've been learning everything you can about the Vryn, how they think, how they fight, how they live. You've seen firsthand how they treat those they consider inferior. Now tell me, is there anything we can use against them? Any flaw, any blind spot?" Lyra hesitated, her mind racing. Over the past few days, she'd absorbed every detail Tarek had taught her about the Vryn culture, their rigid hierarchy, and their obsession with dominance. They were a species built on order, discipline, and an unshakable belief in their own superiority. But beneath that facade of strength lay cracks born of arrogance and fear. "There is one thing," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. They hate disorder. Chaos terrifies them. That's why they chain people like animals, to control them, to prove they're above everyone else. If we can disrupt their sense of control, if we can make them feel vulnerable, we might break them." The room fell silent as her words sank in. Then Elias nodded slowly, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." Over the next 24 hours, the crew devised a bold plan. Instead of hiding in the Veil Nebula, they would use it as a staging ground to launch a counterattack one designed not just to defeat the Vryn, but to shatter their illusion of invincibility. The idea was simple yet audacious: infiltrate Zixer 7 itself, strike at the heart of the Vryn Empire, and expose their greatest weakness, their reliance on fear to maintain power. Lyra was central to the plan. Her intimate knowledge of the underground arena and the layout of the capital city made her the perfect guide. More importantly, Her presence alone would serve as a symbol, a reminder that even the weakest among them could rise up and challenge tyranny. As the Eos dawn approached the nebula, the tension aboard the ship was palpable. The crew worked around the clock, arming themselves with makeshift weapons and rehearsing their roles in the operation. Lyra spent hours poring over maps and schematics with Tarek, memorizing every detail of the mission. Despite her growing confidence, fear gnawed at her constantly. What if she failed? What if her actions only made things worse? Her doubts reached a breaking point late one night, as she stood alone in the observation deck, staring out at the swirling colors of the nebula. The beauty of it was mesmerizing, yet it offered no comfort. She clenched her fists, fighting back tears. When Elias appeared beside her, "You look like someone carrying the weight of the galaxy on her shoulders," he said gently. "I am," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "If this goes wrong, it's my fault. Everyone's counting on me, and I'm just one person," Elias chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You're underestimating yourself again. Do you know why I freed you back on Zixer 7? It wasn't because I pitied you. It was because I saw something in you, something the Vryn couldn't see. Strength, resilience, hope." He paused, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're not doing this alone, Lyra. None of us are. That's what makes us human. We fight for each other, not just ourselves. And that's something the Vryn will never understand." His words struck a chord deep within her. Slowly, she nodded, feeling a spark of resolve reignite in her chest. "Okay," she said, her voice steadier now. "Let's finish this." When the Eos dawn emerged from the nebula, it was cloaked in stealth technology borrowed from a sympathetic alien trader. Under cover of darkness, the crew descended onto Zixer 7, slipping past the Vryn defenses like ghosts. Lyra led the way, guiding them through hidden tunnels and abandoned passageways until they reached the heart of the capital city. Their target was the grand amphitheater, the same place where she had endured countless tortures and humiliations. Tonight, however, it would become a stage for something far greater. As the crew set explosives and prepared distractions, Lyra climbed to the highest balcony overlooking the arena below. From here, she would deliver the final blow, not with violence, but with truth. When the Vryn gathered in confusion, drawn by the chaos erupting around them, Lyra stepped into the light. Her voice rang out, amplified by Tarek's translation device, speaking directly to the crowd in their language. "You think you're strong," she declared, her words cutting through the air like a blade. "But your strength is an illusion built on fear, built on lies. Look at me. I was once your prisoner, your plaything. And now I stand before you free? Because humanity doesn't bow to tyrants." We rise. For a moment there was silence. Then, as the explosions began and the arena shook, the Vryn erupted into panic. Their carefully constructed world was crumbling, and for the first time, they realized they weren't untouchable. In that moment, Lyra knew they had won not just the battle, but something far more important, the beginning of change. The amphitheater erupted into chaos as Lyra's words echoed through the cavernous space. The Vryn, who prided themselves on order and control, were thrown into disarray by the sight of their former prisoner standing tall and defiant. Explosions rocked the structure, sending shards of glowing crystal raining down onto the panicked crowd. Smoke billowed from hidden charges planted earlier by the crew, obscuring vision and scattering the insectoid creatures like leaves in a storm. But it wasn't just the physical destruction that unsettled them, it was the message Lyra delivered. Her voice carried not anger or hatred, but an unyielding truth that pierced through their arrogance. For centuries, the Vryn had ruled Zixer 7 with an iron grip, believing themselves superior to all other species. Now, for the first time, they faced the reality that their dominance was fragile. Built on fear rather than strength, Lyra watched from her perch on the balcony as the Vryn scrambled, their clicking language rising in pitch as panic spread. Some tried to flee, only to find exits blocked by debris or guarded by members of Elias' team. Others turned on each other, their rigid hierarchy crumbling under the weight of uncertainty. It was a scene she never thought she'd witness. Her Captors reduced to chaos, their carefully constructed world unraveling before her eyes. Still, she knew this was far from over. The Vryn wouldn't surrender easily. Even now, reinforcements were likely en route, summoned by frantic calls from those still clinging to fragments of authority. If the crew wanted to finish what they'd started, they needed to act quickly, and decisively. Elias appeared beside her, his visor reflecting the fiery glow of the collapsing arena. "It's working," he said, his tone edged with urgency. "But we're running out of time." "The elites will be here soon." "The elites?" Lyra asked, her stomach tightening at the term. "They're warrior caste," Elias explained grimly. "Heavily armed, highly trained. They won't hesitate to kill anyone in their path, including us." Lyra swallowed hard, her resolve wavering momentarily. She had known the risks when she agreed to this plan, but hearing the confirmation made the stakes feel even higher. "What do we do?" "We hold our ground," Elias replied, his voice unwavering. "We've already planted enough charges to bring this place down. Once the elites arrive, we'll draw them into the center of the arena and trigger the final detonation. It'll collapse the entire structure, cutting off their command chain and giving the rest of the population a chance to rise up." "And U.S.?" Lyra asked, her voice barely audible. "We get out before it happens," Elias said firmly. "I didn't bring you back from hell just to let you die here." Before Lyra could respond, a deafening roar shook the arena. A group of elite Vryn warriors burst through the smoke, their armored forms gleaming menacingly in the dim light. Their leader raised a massive clawed weapon, pointing it directly at Lyra and Elias. "Time to go?" Elias shouted, grabbing Lyra's arm and pulling her toward a narrow staircase leading down to the lower levels. Behind them, the sound of gunfire erupted as the crew engaged the elites, buying precious seconds for their escape. As they descended into the labyrinthine tunnels. Beneath the arena, Lyra's mind raced. Every step felt heavier than the last, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her chest. She had come so far from a broken, defeated prisoner to someone capable of challenging an entire empire. Yet, despite everything, doubt lingered. Could humanity truly triumph against such overwhelming odds? Or was this just another fleeting moment of hope destined to fade? Her thoughts were interrupted when they reached a junction where the rest of the crew waited, weapons drawn and faces tense. Kale was crouched behind a makeshift barricade, reloading his rifle, while Nira tapped furiously at a portable console, monitoring the Vryn forces closing in. Jara knelt beside Tarek, who clutched his side, blood seeping through his fingers. "What happened?" Lyra exclaimed, rushing to Tarek's side. "He took a hit covering our retreat," Jara said tersely, applying pressure to the wound. "He'll live, but we need to move fast." Elias scanned the group, his expression grim. "They're gaining on us. We've got maybe 2 minutes before they breach this position." "Then let's make sure those 2 minutes count," Nira snapped, her sharp gaze locking onto the map displayed on her console. "If we split up, we can lead them into separate traps. That'll buy us enough time to reach the extraction point." "No," Lyra said suddenly, surprising even herself. Everyone turned to look at her, and she straightened, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "We don't split up. We stay together. That's how we win, not by fighting alone, but by fighting as one." For a moment, silence hung, heavy in the air. Then Elias nodded slowly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "She's right. We stick together. Let's move." With renewed determination, the group pushed forward, navigating the twisting tunnels with precision. Lyra led the way, her memory of the underground passages guiding them past traps and pitfalls. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. The elites were relentless, driven by fury and desperation. Finally, they reached the extraction point, a small docking bay hidden deep within the city, where a single shuttle awaited. But as they emerged into the open space, Lyra froze. Standing between them and the shuttle was a towering figure clad in black armor, its exoskeleton glinting ominously in the low light. It was the leader of the elite warriors, larger and more imposing than any Vryn she'd ever seen. "You shouldn't have come back," the creature hissed, its voice dripping with venom. This is our world, you are nothing. Lyra stepped forward, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. You're wrong, she said, her voice ringing clear and strong. This isn't just your world anymore. And we're not nothing. We're human. With that, Elias signaled the crew and they sprang into action. What followed was a desperate, chaotic battle, a clash of raw courage against overwhelming force. Each member of the crew played their part, covering for one another, sacrificing for the greater good. And through it all, Lyra stood at the center, refusing to back down. When the dust settled and the last of the elites fell, the crew stumbled aboard the shuttle, battered but alive. As they lifted off, the arena collapsed behind them in a fiery explosion, shaking the very foundations of ZYXR-7. In that moment, Lyra realized something profound. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't in individual heroics, it was in unity, in standing together no matter the odds. And as the shuttle soared into the sky, she allowed herself a small, hopeful smile. The fight wasn't over yet, but for the first time, victory felt possible. The shuttle roared through the atmosphere of ZYXR-7, its engines straining against gravity as it climbed higher and higher. Inside, the crew sat in stunned silence, their bodies battered, but their spirits unbowed. Lyra clutched the edge of her seat, her knuckles white as she stared out the viewport at the burning horizon below. The amphitheater's collapse had sent shockwaves rippling across the city, its once imposing spires now reduced to rubble. Fires raged in the streets, illuminating the chaos that had erupted among the Vryn populace for the first time in centuries. The Vryn were leaderless, cut off from their elites, their command structure shattered. Panic spread like wildfire as rumors of rebellion began to circulate. In the absence of authority, cracks formed within their rigid society, exposing the fragility of their dominance. It was a turning point, one born not just from explosives or weapons, but from the power of an idea that even the smallest voice could spark change. But the victory came at a cost. Tarek lay unconscious on a makeshift stretcher, his breathing shallow despite Jara's best efforts to stabilize him. Kale nursed a deep gash on his arm, while Nira's hands trembled slightly as she monitored the shuttle's systems. Elias, though outwardly composed, bore the weight of leadership heavily. Dark circles underlined his eyes, and his jaw was clenched tight. Lyra felt it too, the toll of everything they'd endured. Her legs ached from running, her throat burned from shouting, and her mind churned with conflicting emotions. Relief warred with guilt, pride with fear. She had faced the elites, stood toe-to-toe with creatures who had once treated her as less than an animal and lived to tell the tale. Yet, looking around at her wounded comrades, she couldn't shake the question, was it worth it? As the shuttle broke free of ZYXR-7's toxic clouds and emerged into the cold vastness of space, Elias turned to address the group. His voice was calm but carried an edge of urgency. We're not done yet, he said. The Vryn won't give up, not. After this, they'll regroup, rebuild, and come after us with everything they've got. What do we do? Kale asked, wincing as he shifted his injured arm. We can't keep running forever. No, Elias agreed. Which is why we need to strike back before they recover. But not here. Not on ZYXR-7, he tapped a glowing display on the console, pulling up a map of nearby star systems. A single red dot pulsed ominously at the edge of the screen. This is their homeworld, the origin of their empire. If we hit them there, we can dismantle their entire system. Without their core, the rest will crumble. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Attacking the Vryn homeworld was madness, a suicide mission by any measure. Their resources were stretched thin, their ship damaged, and their numbers far too few to take on an entire planet. And yet, no one argued. Deep down, they all knew it was the only way to end this, to break the cycle of oppression once and for all. Lyra spoke up, her voice steady despite the knot of dread in her stomach. How do we get there? Elias hesitated, then met her gaze. By showing them what humanity really is, by proving that we're more than survivors, we're fighters. Fighters who don't give up, no matter the odds. When the EOS Dawn rendezvoused with the shuttle hours later, the crew wasted no time preparing for the next phase of their plan. Repairs were made hastily, supplies rationed carefully, and strategies refined until every detail was accounted for. Lyra threw herself into the work, channeling her anxiety into action. She helped Kale reinforce the ship's hull, assisted Jara in the medbay, and spent hours poring over intel with Tarek, who had regained consciousness but remained weak-dotted. It was during one of these sessions that Tarek shared something that would change everything. Leaning closer, his voice barely above a whisper, he said, "There's something you should know about the Vryn homeworld. Something I discovered while decoding their transmissions." "What is it?" Lyra asked, leaning in. "Their society isn't as united as it seems," Tarek explained. "There's dissent brewing beneath the surface. Lower castes are growing. Restless, tired of being crushed under the elite's rule. If we can amplify that discontent, if we can show them that resistance is possible, they might rise up themselves." Lyra's eyes widened. "You mean we don't have to fight alone?" "Exactly," Tarek replied with a faint smile. "Sometimes the greatest weapon isn't force, it's hope." Days passed in a blur as the Eos dawn approached the Vryn homeworld. The planet loomed large in the viewport, its surface a patchwork of gleaming cities and sprawling industrial zones. Massive orbital stations floated in geosynchronous orbit, bristling with weapons and defenses. It was a fortress, a monument to the Vryn's belief in their own invincibility. But as the crew prepared to execute their plan, Lyra stepped forward, her expression resolute. "Let me go first," Elias frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I'll broadcast a message," she said firmly, "to the lower castes, to anyone willing to listen. Let them hear my story, what the Vryn did. To me, how they treat those they see as inferior. If Tarek's right, if there's already unrest, this could be the spark they need." "It's too dangerous," Elias protested. "They'll target you immediately. They already did," Lyra countered. "And I'm still standing. Trust me, Elias, this is what I was meant to do." After a long pause, Elias nodded reluctantly. "All right. But we're coming in hot behind you. No heroics." With the crew's support, Lyra recorded her message, a raw, unfiltered account of her captivity, her escape, and the truth about the Vryn's tyranny. When it was ready, the signal was transmitted directly to the planet's communication grid, bypassing the elite's control. Within minutes, the message spread like wildfire, reaching millions of Vryn citizens who had never dared to question their rulers. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Protests erupted in the streets. Factories ground to a halt, and entire districts declared independence from the central government. Chaos consumed the homeworld, leaving the elites scrambling to regain control, and amidst the turmoil, the Eos Dawn struck its final blow, targeting key installations and severing the elite's grip on power. As explosions lit up the night sky, Lyra stood on the bridge watching the Empire crumble before her eyes. In that moment, she realized something profound. Humanity wasn't defined by strength or size, it was defined by courage, empathy, and the unshakable belief that even the smallest act of defiance could change the world. The Vryn homeworld burned, not with destruction, but with the flames of rebellion. Smoke rose from factories where workers had seized control, shattering chains both literal and metaphorical. Streets once ruled by elites now teemed with lower caste Vryn marching under banners stitched together from scraps, their clicking chants echoing defiance instead of submission. It was a revolution unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, a people rising against their oppressors, inspired not by hatred, but by hope. On board the Eos Dawn, Lyra stood on the observation deck, her hands gripping the railing as she watched. The planet below transformed before her eyes. The ship hovered just outside the atmosphere, its systems humming softly in the background. Behind her, the crew gathered quietly, their faces etched with exhaustion but also pride. They had done the impossible, together. "It's over," Elias said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost reverent, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the fragile beauty of what they had accomplished. "They won't recover from this." Lyra nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the glowing horizon. "No," she agreed, "but it's not because of us." "Not really. We gave them a chance to fight for themselves." "That's what matters." Elias stepped closer, his expression thoughtful. When I first saw you in that arena, I didn't think much beyond getting you out alive, but now—" He paused, shaking his head slightly. "You've changed everything for them, for us, for humanity." "I didn't do it alone," Lyra replied softly. Her eyes flicked to the rest of the crew Kale, who was already back at work patching up the ship. Nira, whose sharp wit masked a deep well of compassion. Jara, tending to Tarek's wounds with quiet dedication. And Tarek himself, seated nearby, his pale face lit by the faint glow of a datapad. Each of them had played a part in this victory, each contributing something unique yet inseparable from the whole. "And neither did you," she added, turning back to Elias. "None of us could have done this without the others." As the days passed, the crew began making preparations to leave the Vryn system behind. Their mission was complete, but the scars of battle lingered. Repairs to the Eos Dawn were extensive, requiring every ounce of Kale's ingenuity and patience. Supplies was stretched thin, forcing rationing until they reached the nearest human colony. Yet despite the challenges, there was an undeniable sense of camaraderie aboard the ship, a bond forged in fire and tempered by shared sacrifice. One evening, as the stars streaked past the viewport during a hyperspace jump, the crew gathered in the lounge for a rare moment of downtime. Someone had salvaged a bottle of synthetic wine from the cargo hold, and though it tasted more like fermented fruit juice than anything truly celebratory, it served its purpose. Laughter filled the room for the first time in weeks, lightening hearts heavy with memories of loss and struggle. Lyra sat off to the side, watching her newfound family interact. She felt different now, not just physically, though her body bore the marks of survival, but emotionally. The chains that had bound her for so long were gone, replaced by something far stronger: freedom. Freedom not just from captivity, but from fear, doubt, and despair. "Hey," Elias said, sliding into the seat beside her. He held out a glass of the fizzy concoction, raising an eyebrow expectantly. "You earned this." She accepted it with a small smile, taking a tentative sip. "I never thought I'd see this day," she admitted after a moment. "When I was in that arena, all I wanted was to survive. Just one more day, one more breath. Now," she trailed off, gesturing vaguely toward the viewport, "now I feel like I can actually live." "That's the thing about hope," Elias said, his tone lighter than usual. "It sneaks up on you when you least expect it. And once it takes root, it doesn't let go." Lyra chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Hope isn't exactly what got us here. It was stubbornness, determination, maybe even a little bit of madness." "All those things are part of being human," Elias countered with a grin. "And don't forget courage. You showed more of that than anyone I've ever met." Her cheeks flushed, but before she could respond, Tarek spoke up from across the room. "Speaking of courage," he said, holding up his datapad, "you should read this." He passed the device to Lyra, who scanned the screen curiously. It was a message in an open transmission broadcast across multiple star systems. Written in simple, universal terms, it described the events on Zixer 7 and the Vryn homeworld, detailing how a ragtag crew of humans and allies had toppled an empire. But most importantly, it ended with a single line: **** humanity, heck yeah. **** Lyra stared at the words, her throat tightening unexpectedly. The phrase was simple, almost silly, but it carried a weight far greater than its brevity suggested. It wasn't just a rallying cry, it was a declaration. A reminder that humanity's greatest strength lay not in weapons or technology, but in its heart. Weeks later, the Eos Dawn docked at a bustling human colony near the outer rim. The settlement buzzed with activity, its streets lined with makeshift stalls selling goods scavenged from across the galaxy. Children ran barefoot through the dirt, laughing as drones buzzed overhead, while adults worked tirelessly to build a new life among the stars. For Lyra, stepping onto solid ground again felt surreal. She had spent so long dreaming of freedom. Yet now that it was hers, she found herself hesitant to leave the only home she'd known in years: the ship, the crew, the bonds they had formed. Still, she knew this was just the beginning. There were other worlds to explore, other injustices to confront. other lives to touch. As she prepared to disembark, Elias approached her, his expression unusually serious. Where will you go? He asked. I'm not sure, she admitted. But I'll figure it out, one step at a time. Elias nodded, then extended his hand. Whatever path you choose, remember this, you're stronger than you think. And no matter where you end up, you'll always have a place here with us. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away, offering him a grateful smile. Thank you, she said simply, for everything. With that, she turned and walked down the ramp, her boots crunching softly against the dusty soil. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting golden light across the landscape. For the first time in years, she felt truly free, not just in body, but in spirit. As the ship lifted off behind her, disappearing into the vast expanse of space, Lyra took a deep breath, savoring the cool breeze against her skin. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed, and the sound reminded her of why they had fought so hard. In the end, humanity wasn't defined by its victories or defeats. It was defined by its resilience, its empathy, and its unyielding belief in a better tomorrow. And as long as there were people willing to stand up for what was right, no empire, no matter how powerful, could ever extinguish the flame of hope.